Bounty hunting is a tricky business, especially if you're bounty hunting in the Star Wars universe. You can find out just how tricky with a Disney Plus subscription and watch the latest episodes of The Mandalorian along with all the Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, and Disney content you can handle. In a galaxy far, far away with rebels and outlaws, there's one group of people who have managed to remain enigmatic and doing their own thing. They're so cool that Boba Fett has only 4 lines in the original trilogy, and he still managed to be a fan favorite. Since Boba Fett introduced us to the Mandalorians in a little animated short called The Faithful Wookiee during the ill-conceived Star Wars holiday special, we've all wanted more. The Mando in The Mandalorian is a man of few words, but there's still more than 27. As we learn about Mandalorians after the fall of the Empire, let's take a look at what we already know about the rules of the enigmatic people, with the only armor that actually works in the Star Wars universe. There are 6 rules that form the basis of what it means to be a Mandalorian, known as the Rosel'nare. That might sound like a fancy downhill racing ski, but it's not. It's a strict code that seems to have gotten stricter with the new series. The first rule is to wear the armor. Seems like an easy rule. The armor's cool looking and actually works. There is the tricky issue of the helmet though. Mandalorians like Jango Fett from the prequels and Sabine and her clan from Rebels take their helmets off all the time. For the Mandalorians in the new series, taking the helmet off in front of other people is a no-no. The second rule of the Resol'nare is to speak the language. Mandalorian isn't a race, it's a people. It's an order, which is part of why the rules are so important. They give the Mandalorians definition. Language is a strong part of the people's identity and culture, and that's especially true of a group like the Mandalorians. Mando'a is the language of the Mandalorians, supposedly derived from the Tong of Coruscant, who were displaced by the Galactic Empire, but have evolved over time into its own language that the Mandalorians preserve. If you need an idea about how language and culture go hand in hand, here's an example. Mando'a has no word for hero. Being prepared to die for your family and those close to you is just the way you're supposed to be. They only came up with a word for those who wouldn't step up. There is a Mando'a word for coward. Anyone not willing to step up for them and theirs is a Hutton, as in Jabba the, and is one of the only things that Mandalorians punish. For a people forged in battle, being willing to fight is required. With all the fussing and fighting and collecting bounties and hiding out, you might not think that the Mandalorians have time to raise kids. How do you date when everyone's got a helmet on, huh? Regardless of how it happens, when there are Mandalorian children, it's part of the Resol'nare to raise those children in the way of the Mandalorians. In addition to the Resol'nare, it involves them passing down the skills and practices that made them one of the most respected groups of fighters in a galaxy full of fighters, including Jedis. If Mando raises the little baby Yoda as a Mandalorian, do they have to make a special helmet for those ears? Mandalorian culture is clan or house-based. Throughout the history of the Mandalorian people, there have been various clans on top, with the leader of that clan taking the leadership position for the Mandalorians. Down the ladder, each of the Mandalorian clans have their own leadership structure and specific rules. These stand in for family units for a Mandalorian, and each Mandalorian is expected to contribute to the well-being of their clan. While this might seem redundant to Rules 3 and 5, the final rule of Resol'nare just underlines how important fighting is for the Mandalorians. Rule 3 is about defending yourself and your family. Rule 5 is about defending and assisting your clan. Rule 6, rally to the cause of Mandalore when called upon, is about defending all of Mandalore. This isn't an empty command. Mandalore, despite the reputations, or perhaps because of them, has come under threat a lot, including when the Galactic Empire almost purged the entire Mandalorian people. When the Mandalore is under threat, expect the full force of the Mandalorians to step up. With the new series, we're also getting some new rules, and a look at what life is like for the Mandalorians after the fall of the Empire. Everyone who meets the Mandalorian in the series talks about how they've never met a Mandalorian. Turns out that's by design. The tribe has a strict rule in order to hide their numbers that only one Mandalorian can be out in public at a time. And they don't take off their helmets, that means the rest of them stay in hiding. That is unless Rule 3 and 5 come into play and they have to defend one of their own. Then watch out. Pew 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 pew. Trial by combat has to be a practice proposed by the biggest dude in the room. From Germanic tribes, it was used as a way to settle disputes when there wasn't anything else to go on. The Mandalorians have their own version, via a code that Sabine invokes when she respects Rule 3 and 5 of the Resol'nare, and comes back to her clan when it needs her in the animated series Rebels. Like the Germanic tradition, the code allows for trial by combat. In Sabine's case, it was to establish authority over the clan after another shakeup during the Battle of Concord Dawn. Any society that exists long enough can't just get by on 6 rules. While the Resol'nare is a handy 6-step guide to how to be the best Mandalorian you can be, there was bound to be some expansion. For the Mandalorians, that takes the form of the Canons of Honor. In fine Mandalorian tradition, it's less about codes regarding how high your fence can be before you have to get a building permit from the city, and more about the practices and deeds that go into making one a proper Mandalorian warrior. As such, the Canons of Honor act as a sort of rules of engagement for the Mandalorians, so that when they enter combat, it's up to Mandalorian standards. Everyone loses their way eventually, even the proud people of Mandalore. After a few decades, the proud group of warriors started to resemble a gang more than a society of warriors. So Jaster Mereel updated the Canons of Honor with the Supercommando Codex. The big change was one the Joker would approve of. If you're good at something, never do it for free. Instead of being raiders and brigands, it insisted that Mandalorians get paid to fight. Not everyone was down with the new Codex, however, and a Mandalorian civil war broke out that saw both sides lose ultimately. Regardless, for some of the surviving tribes, the Codex remains the backbone of their society. Codes and rules, even for the starkly individualistic, can be important. Another important thing is making sure that pesky YouTube algorithm works for you. The best way to do that is by subscribing to CBR and ringing the notification bell. Device tracking down your latest target, like a double bacon and cheese. Make sure to turn on notifications in the YouTube settings. This is the way. Well, the way to get the latest videos. These are the rules of the Mandalorians. What do you think? Could you live with all that helmet hair if no one ever had to see it? With canon and non-canon Mandalorian stories out there, what rule isn't on the list that you think makes the Mandalorian? Are you a cosplayer fighting over the helmet rule? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.